5 p.m. we'll open the meeting, first planning committee meeting of this term of council. So welcome everybody, and we've almost got a full council contingent, bar one. So I'll start confirmation. All right, confirmation of minutes from previous meeting, moved by the Deputy Lord Mayor. Do we need a second? No. All those in favour say aye. Say no. Carried. Consideration of supplementary items. I don't think we have any. Not. Move on. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Are there any? Very good. Transfer of agenda items. I think so. And consideration of items with deputations. 2. So thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. So council is now acting as a planning authority. The first item is 5.1.1, 14 Marlborough Street, Sandy Bay, and we have the applicant here for a deputation, Mr. Philip Starry. Is he? Do you want to come to that desk at the just there? Yep.
What? Sorry?
Pull the microphone reasonably close to you, and you'll have 5 minutes, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for you after that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman, councillors. It won't take 5 minutes for what I've got to say. Keep it brief. Everyone's busy. As Alderman Broker said, I'm not the owner, I'm the applicant, and I have no interest in the outcome of today's deliberations. I just thought I should say that up front. The proposal doesn't meet the acceptable standards or performance criteria, but it was the owner's decision to take it to the committee because she, who can't be here, lives in Western Australia, wanted to present her own sort of personal feeling about the matter. And the background history is probably important ultimately for your deliberation. The property was purchased in 2012 by the current owner. At that stage, it was 2 flats. It had a number of iterations before that. It was originally built as a house with a garage underneath. Somewhere between 1972 and 2002, an elevated car parking area was built off the street. It's a very steep street, by the way, if people haven't seen it. Difficult access, I grant you. So in 2002, an elevated car park was built. I believe that went through council. In 2006, it was still a single dwelling. Somewhere between 2006 and 2012, when the owner bought it, she bought it as 2 flats. And council have no record of permits or approvals. The site only has 2 car parking spaces at the moment. It's operating as 2 flats. There's no room for any more, simple as that. And I'm not aware, even though they have to reverse out onto the street, of any accidents. I rang the owner to see if she had any record of any of the tenants ever having an accident or difficulty. Of course, she said no. That being said, it's operated for 10 years as it is. It's come before council as a non-compliant situation. Obviously, it doesn't meet the standards, and she is now required to restore it back to a single house as the only possible outcome if she can't have the 2 flats that are there now. That's basically the crux of her dilemma. It's not my problem, obviously. But I'd like to say on her behalf that obviously if she's got to go back to a single dwelling, she loses the income of the second flat or unit. It's a bit of a double penalty, really. The city loses a house, if you like. And given the state government's commitment to 30,000 new homes in 10 years, they've got to get cracking. Somewhere they've got to provide these houses. And if it was a new application, fair enough. It's got to comply. It's got to meet all the standards. But this is an existing situation that's been like that for at least 10 years. It's not possible for her to remedy the problem. There's just not the space to provide additional car parks or indeed to get them to drive out frontwards. And I'm just thinking to myself, as a student, I lived in Germany for a little while, and you just didn't expect in downtown Berlin to be able to have an apartment, park 2 cars there, let alone turn them around on site and drive them out frontways. It's just not done. The reason that's the case is they've got a lot of people living in a city space, and they just discourage people from owning cars. And I applaud the council's endeavour to have e-bikes floating around the place. I think it's a great situation. Smaller cars are more fashionable these days, smart cars. People are creative. They'll rent a unit or live in a flat knowing that it doesn't have a lot of car parking. That's a market situation, obviously. And that's basically what I've got to say. I'll just leave time for people to ask a few questions, and then I'll get out of your hair.
A lot. Are there any questions from Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions I have. Firstly, what if it was only 2 units and not 3 units?
I think it won't comply.
Come again?
It won't comply with the residential parking code.
Yeah.
And
all right. And the second question is, it is my understanding that a traffic assessment statement was requested, and it was refused. Do you know the reason for the refusal?
Not so much refused. I advised the client that it was just impossible to meet, notwithstanding a traffic assessment, to meet the straight-out requirements of on-site parking and turning. They just couldn't achieve it. So therefore, I thought it was a waste of time for her to engage a traffic engineer to do an assessment, maybe $1,000 or $2 in costs, only to find that it wouldn't work.
And just a final question, Chair, through you. You mentioned that we are supposed to have about 13,000 homes in order to meet the supply and demand. Would you agree that that is not the criteria on which we assess this?
Yeah, sorry, of course. I should have prefaced it by saying that you're not here to consider that, I know.
Thank you. Okay.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. You referred to if this isn't approved or if this doesn't go through, that it will return to a single dwelling, a single house. What's your understanding of what that configuration is? Is that a 3-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house, or we don't know?
2 bedrooms downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs.
But if the flats aren't approved, it has to return to whatever the original configuration was. Does it have to refer to a single dwelling, the whole building?
Single dwelling, the whole building, yeah.
And do you know what bedrooms that would be? Or it might be a question for the director.
As a single dwelling, it'd be 5 bedrooms, and they'd have to cut a hole in one of the bedrooms or one of the spaces to go downstairs. There's no stair down connecting the two at the moment, so that can easily be done, of course.
Could I have confirmation of that through the director of the number of bedrooms it would be if it referred to one dwelling, the whole block?
Yeah, happy. Would normally do that after.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do questions, and then we'll do questions for the staff after.
Thank you.
The Lord Mayor and then Councillor Basalt.
Okay. With the current setup with the tenants and the owner, how many sort of cars are using that driving space?
Only 2 can fit.
Oh, only 2 can fit. Oh, looks
Only
bigger
2
than
can
that.
fit.
Okay. The owner and one of the flat.
One of the flats.
And
now,
then,
you might just jockey someone in behind if you had 2 small cars.
Yeah, and then people can park outside, obviously, as well.
I don't know they do, because there are markings on the street that prevent it on the opposite side. I'm not aware on the same side. I suppose they do park there, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was just looking at Google Earth. There seems to be space for people parking on both sides of the street.
Yeah, okay. Yep, that's...
And a turning circle at the end of the street, by the looks. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Basalt and then Councillor Harvey's next.
Just a single question about your assertion that there is no possibility of further parking. I inspected the site, and why is there no possibility of additional parking up the hill in the current garden?
Cutting into the hill, yeah, but you can't turn. You can get cars in there, but you can't turn around. But you're right.
But you could.
Oh, yeah.
You could engineer.
Physically, yes, engineering, you could build a retaining wall and provide more car park spaces. That's true.
Come closer to meeting the requirement.
Correct.
of
That
total
was a
five.
scheme I did present at one stage, but it was decided not
So
to
it
go
is
ahead.
possible to do more parking.
Yes, it is possible.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can you just confirm, is it currently being used as a 2-flat or 3-flat property?
It had a life up until about 2 years ago of being 3 flats. The owner had squashed in another tenant downstairs. And that's how it came to council's attention.
That's 3 sets of kitchens and bathrooms and things.
Correct.
Any other questions? Deputy.
So my understanding from the report through you, Chair, is that there is limited parking around on the street. So it says that it does not ensure sufficient parking on site to minimise or on-street parking. So there's fairly limited on-street parking. Are you aware of that, or?
On or off-street parking?
Pardon?
Did you say on-street parking?
On-street.
I'm not aware of that.
It says here that the relatively narrow highway reservation is not suitable for long-term on-street car parking.
Right, that could be so.
Right,
But I
okay.
think people still do that, not just for this property.
Thank you.
Other questions? All good. Thanks a lot. If you want to return to your seat, we'll get stuck into you two. Alderman Zuko.
Some questions through you to the appropriate officer or the director. If this is refused, would the property have to revert to back to 5 bedrooms?
It would have to revert back to a single dwelling, I think.
Single dwelling, if there's 5 bedrooms in the dwelling now, that be correct or incorrect? Or?
Well, in terms of the number of bedrooms, it depends on whether...
Bedrooms, sorry.
Yeah, look, it depends on what they use the rooms for. I mean, it could be 4 bedrooms and a rumpus, or 5 bedrooms, or 3 bedrooms and a rumpus and a study. So
Well,
really, it's hypothetical.
I'll rephrase the question. If the proponent sought to use the house for 5 bedrooms, could they well do so?
Yes, they could.
Okay. The other question is, if it was a single dwelling and there were 10 people living in the house, could there be 10 people having cars individually?
It certainly could be, hypothetically.
Well, the other question I'd like to ask is, could this application be restricted specifically for this owner and revert back to a single dwelling in a future sale? Yes or no? Just a question.
No.
Okay. Look, I'd like to start the ball rolling here. We talk about...
I'm just wondering, can I ask some questions to the director as well before we go into discussion, or?
Oh, we don't have to go through, like, people can move.
People can ask questions and debate.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'm just seeking clarification. That's all. Yeah.
Look, I just want to start the ball rolling. We have got a massive shortage of housing in this city. One of the things that I've stated in this council many, many times about younger people wanting smaller apartments. If we got in a situation where we can create more rental accommodation, and the biggest argument when I read this report has got to do with cars and car parking. Not everyone drives a car, but that's why I asked the questions on the other side, because we well know if a large family decides to move into this establishment, there could be more cars. Now, I understand that under the scheme, there's a requirement to have a certain amount of cars per dwelling. But at the end of the day, there could be the same amount of cars, if not more cars, if it's back to a single dwelling and 4 different couples move in there, or 3 different couples, or 2 different couples. I think if we are serious about trying to help the housing market, even though it doesn't meet the criteria of the scheme, I think sometimes we've got to overlook that, and in particular when there's no objectives, and it's been operating like this for a vast number of years without an issue. It's only been brought to light because the person decided to go from 2 apartments to 3 apartments. If that hadn't happened, it could have been operating as 2 apartments continuously. I'm not saying that we should support people that breach regulations, but again, this council has been around for a while, and it's every day. It was in the news last night about the shortage of housing. I don't often go against the council recommendations, but in the reading of the report, I just want to ask one more question before I finish. Could the council? I don't think we can, but I want to ask the question because that's part of the other thing I'd like to get the minister to do one day that I spoke to you about, Mr. Noy. Could it be possible that we could restrict the third dwelling, if approved, to an affordable rental? We haven't got those under the Act yet. I know that. It's okay. I thought that. But look, I've got a tendency, if someone moves, to approve this, to support it, only on the basis of the shortage of housing in the city, and on the basis that the car parking argument is justified. But again, there could be more. There could be more cars if it's a big house, and 2 or 3 different couples decide to move in, or a big family with things. So if someone moves to overturn this for approval, I will support it, but I'm not going to move it.
Councillor Harvey had his hand up, but did Councillor Dudder have a question?
Councillor Dudder was ahead of me.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, with regards to, through you, Chair, through the Director, the breach of this, what's the penalty for breaching this? Because it was done illegally.
In terms of lodging the application, retrospective approval in this instance with an applicant that hasn't got prior history of such activity is double the application fee, and the application fee, assessment fees, in this instance was $500. So that's effectively the penalty for this retrospective application.
Councillor Harvey.
So through you, Chair, to the Director. So if this does revert back to a large or 5-bedroom house, is there any reason why you can't have people living in your 5-bedroom house in the 2 bedrooms downstairs as, tenants in your house without it being classified as a flat?
I mean, look, you have shared house situations everywhere, so you can have that arrangement. You could have that arrangement here.
So so technically they could just say, okay, it's one house, but tenants are welcome to live downstairs in my house.
Yeah, look, there are limitations on additional kitchens, for example, and the like. So to be treated as a single dwelling, you need to have only one of those facilities.
So they would have to, if they removed...
Have to remove certain facilities.
Then they'd have to all share the one kitchen upstairs.
That's right.
Kind of, yeah. Why is that? Because look, I am sympathetic to this household. I think it would be sad to lose this house, and the sole reason is because there's there's 2 car parks short. So if we did approve this as 2 flats, how does that impact on future applications elsewhere? Does that mean that everyone could suddenly put in an application for 2 flats because and not have enough parking, or if this was in the city, you wouldn't need parking at all?
Look, it's important to understand that it only has approval for 1 dwelling. So to suggest that they'd be losing, a flat is not technically correct in terms of the approvals that we already have before us. But having said that, each application is considered on its merits, and an application won't create a precedent for other applications.
But this could be classified as 2 flats if we made that decision tonight.
That's correct.
And that wouldn't break the boundaries of anything other than
no, it
your
wouldn't.
recommendation.
It wouldn't set a precedent. It wouldn't set a precedent, but clearly, you know, the officers have raised concerns about compliance with the scheme. They've formed that opinion, but it's open to the committee to form a different view.
And last go, it would require the removal of a third kitchen from the premises.
That's correct. There would need to be a conversion occur. Yeah, my understanding that the suggestion's been made that that has occurred, or yeah.
Then Councillor Kelly and then Councillor Elliott.
So yeah, I did want to clarify. So it is currently 2 flats, yeah. So the third, the division into 3 has stopped. So just to clarify, there's no concerns with the design or safety of the second kitchen or the bathroom. They're all totally within the rules of a safe sort of dwelling.
I mean, there'd need to be an inspection of that by a building surveyor after planning approval was given.
But it wasn't raised in the planning.
No, and it's not. That's not a planning matter. In terms of the standard of the kitchen, that is a building.
But we can feel confident that if there was problems there, they'd be fixed. Yeah. And also, I'm just a bit curious about. It sort of said that there was limited access to public transport, but then in the report it says that it is actually close to the Churchill Avenue bus, and it is within 400 metres. And that seems to operate quite a lot of buses, including Saturdays and Sundays. So why did they then say that was?
I think it was a frequency of those buses. I think that was the assessment. Now, as I've indicated, that's the officer's view.
But it says limited access to public transport in this area, but it is actually within 400 metres of a bus.
It is. It is.
Okay. I don't quite understand that judgment call, but
Lord Mayor, may I just? It mentions specifically topography as very steep. It's very, very steep, as something that may preclude people from using public transport.
okay. The other one is just around the width of the road, because it says it just gives that relatively narrow highway reservation. But I mean, I guess having had some challenges with residents who can't park outside their property and allow an ambulance past, because there's it's a narrow road, and if they park on the road, an ambulance can't get past them. This one still seems like, looking on Google Maps, it still seems like a regular road that potentially has room for 2 cars on either side, and you'd still get an ambulance or something through.
Yeah. No,
so in that sense, relatively narrow highway reservation is a bit sort of vague, really, isn't it, for us to make that sort of decision?
Well, look, I think it can deter people from parking on those streets. I think that was the intimation with that statement. So.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to sort of ideally have the width of the road and know whether it's within Australian standards and for a two-way road and stuff. But yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I guess I'm happy to move for approval, because I feel that these kind of conversions of larger family homes into multiple dwellings is a really important opportunity, and I do feel that we've paid too much. We've let sort of car parking sometimes really drive planning in a way that is very inflexible and not ideal, because it does often add to the costs of housing, and many cities are now decoupling housing development from provision of car parking because it ends up saving a huge amount of money for a housing market. And so, given the only real concern here is about the provision of multiple car parking spaces in a relatively quiet street that doesn't seem to have a massive problem with the on-street parking, and I just think we can't always presume that everybody is necessarily going to have multiple cars in their dwellings. I am comfortable, given that's the only concern, I'm comfortable to allow for this to be retained as a two-dwelling property.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Before I hand over to the Deputy, I'll just note while the conversation was happening around buses, I just looked it up on the website and there's buses on that part of Churchill Avenue every half an hour. So note that, Deputy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Director. I just want to clarify in my mind the enforcement matter. How was that raised? How did that come to be an issue for council?
I'm not completely sure.
Can't take that on notice, can you? Because we have to make a decision tonight.
Yeah, unless Miss Aby is...
I can beaver away and have a look.
Yeah, Miss Aby will undertake a little bit of research while we're continuing the debate, and we'll come back to you on that one.
Also, to the Director again, through you, Chair, the parking requirements for a single dwelling, how is it just two?
Just two.
Just two, right, okay. And to the point that the Lord Mayor raised, we've had in the past, and I know former Councillor Coates was very interested in parking, probably not for the same reasons as me or for what the Lord Mayor has raised, but where are we doing some work on the planning scheme provisions for parking, or is there any sort of review of that?
Look, there are reviews going on so far as the state provisions are concerned, and I think there'll be work come out of the Central Hobart structure plan around car parking provisions and the like. So there is continuing work done in that space.
I'm curious to know, Chair, about the enforcement, because we didn't have any representations in relation to this, and sometimes if it's if there's an ongoing issue around matters like cars on roads or people coming and going in neighbourhoods, then it can be a matter for neighbours. Sometimes there's not really friendly relationships with neighbours when there's an ongoing issue. So the fact that there are no representations doesn't necessarily, in my mind, make it a straightforward situation. Have we got an answer there?
Not yet. We know it was going since 2018. It may have been rates that picked it up or the like, but I'll get confirmation.
All right, yeah. I have sympathy for having a 5-bedroom house as well as having 2 apartments on one block. So to me, it's either way. It doesn't really matter. You know, I think what things have been said are valid just as they are as a house. So I will support the Lord Mayor's motion.
Just got confirmation, sorry, that it was rates department that picked it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Kelly, and then Councillor Elliott, and then Alderman Zerko.
There's an interesting application, this. I note that there has been no representations made against it. It's been mentioned. It seems to be working effectively in the neighbourhood without any accidents or the like, and the acute shortage of housing as we all know it. On the other side of the coin, I really am concerned that if this exact application was to be presented to planning tomorrow in a new application, it will be outright refused. And you know, I really am concerned that a double standard is going to be established here, and I can see there being huge problems with the planning officers and the like, and that does concern me about the reputation of a council that could be perceived to be having that big double standard. So whether, you know, the car parking issue needs to be completely modified to work for a situation like this may well be the case, but the fact of the matter is it isn't at the moment, and that's the law. I do have a question through you, Chair, to the Director, if I may. The other park that was talked about going up the top bit, and if that was engineered, of course, to satisfaction, could discretion be given for an additional car park to go there, albeit that it can't turn, it could be reversing out, as we know most people in these roads seem to be? Could that not be a way of possibly providing at least some leeway here and getting some resolution on this?
I mean, yes, you could do that in terms of creating car parking space that allowed backing onto the street, but you couldn't do that as part of this application because it is a substantial. You know, it's not part of the application. It would be a substantial requirement on the part of well. You know, it's tantamount to refusal because it's not part of the current application.
So if this was refused, the owner could apply. Could they get some clear definition on that prior to an application to do that? Yeah. Okay. So I see that as a possible way of probably way of doing that. But yeah, look, in theory it works, but I just know with these rules it can come back to bite us big time with future applications. So I would have no problem supporting it if that other car park could work. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott and then Alderman Zerko.
Thank you. So I'd be supporting a motion for approval on this. The reason being, I think the alternative could very well be a higher impact from the parking perspective. Also, I think there's reasonable access to a bus service, and in my opinion, the on-street parking that's available, it may already be being used. There's nothing stopping the people currently choosing not to park in the driveway and already parking on the street. So, like I said, I'll be supporting a motion. Listening to Councillor Kelly's talk of a requirement for a third park, I personally don't see that as necessary. I'm not sure whether it falls under scope or not, but it just seeing the frontage of the house and a wall of car parking concerns me a bit, and I don't think that, I think it's satisfied without that, so I'd be supporting a motion for approval.
Yes, look, a sort of more of a question in regards to, we have a report here from council officers recommending approval. Has the refusal. Has the director any conditions of approval with him at this point in time? Because if we approve this, we need to approve it with the appropriate conditions. We may have to defer the approval subject to those conditions. Is that no, we don't? Or
we do. We don't have to defer. We do have conditions.
Oh, you do have conditions? That's the big question. Yeah, do have conditions? We're fine.
Okay.
That's okay.
Can I, sorry, can I ask one more question? Just in relation to what was raised by Councillor Kelly about if this sort of proposal came forward ordinarily, that somebody wants to convert their house into a flat, but they don't have a granny type of apartment, but they only have room for 2 car parks or whatever. Would those be being rejected on a regular basis and we don't even know about it? Because if that's the case, I'd be concerned about that, and I think it goes to a motion that the deputy moved over a year ago about sort of how do we actually encourage the sort of conversion of larger homes into sort of multiple dwellings.
Well, one, officers don't have necessarily delegation to refuse outright, unless they're out of time, so unless it's clearly prohibited, and such an application wouldn't be prohibited per se. And there are two different. A granny flat, if it's an ancillary flat, is under 60 square metres, then that still constitutes as a single dwelling under the scheme. So just the same number of car parking spaces as a single dwelling. But in this instance, it's not an ancillary flat. It is a separate flat because it is over 60 square metres. So.
So it's the 60 square metres is the trigger point. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting to know. Yeah. Okay.
I've got Councillor Basalt and then Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Dutta.
So I'm inclined to not approve this and go with the council recommendations, the officer recommendations. I've visited the site. It is properly steep, even by Hobart standards. It really is. Enough that it is a significant impediment to people taking public transport. The average gradient from the closest bus stop is 16%. That's average. And the street is narrow in terms of parking, and there is a yellow line across the road that precludes parking in that space. The other thing that hasn't really been pointed out in the debate is that it's 2 parking spaces. They're jockey parking, which means you have to go and knock on your neighbour's door if you want to get your car out. And I think that the practical implication to that is that you won't put your car in the front spot, and it's actually only 1. There may well be space for 2, but it's actually only 1 parking spot in reality, because I just can't foresee myself every time I want to go somewhere knocking on the neighbour's door. They're taking the public transport and their car's there. What's the arrangement? Further to that, I think noting that this residence was purchased without the owner doing due diligence to work out what was legal, if they were purchasing a legal property, is my understanding. And I think the onus is on the purchaser to identify if they're purchasing something that has appropriate planning approval. Subsequently to that, they went ahead and added a further flat without approval. And so I'm inclined to not kind of give much leeway here, because as well as that, council recommended that they undertake some traffic planning. They decided not to do that. And further to that, there is the ability to engineer further car parking spaces to meet the planning criteria, which they have chosen not to do. And the only argument that I've heard from the deputation is that there will be financial loss for the owner should they have to sell their property, because it's no longer 2 apartments, it's a single dwelling. But they're unwilling to engineer a solution, they're unwilling to provide a traffic management plan, and they've not gone about the correct process in the past. So with that in mind, and bearing in mind the significant hill, as well as parking considerations, that I think that we should stick with I believe that we should go with the officer recommendations to refuse.
Councillor Basalt, Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, Chair. So it was 3 flats, now it's 2 flats, so there's more than likely a reduction in car parking anyway. If everyone had if there were 3 separate tenants with, with the extra cars for the extra flat. So I'll be supporting the motion for approval, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin by making some observations first. Firstly, I think the point made by Councillor Kelly for me is significant in that that there was a breach. Now, if we go ahead and support something that was breached, it sends a very negative message to the community that there can be standards you can breach, and then we'll get an endorsement from council retrospectively. So that's an observation I make, and it's a concern. Secondly, the point that was also made by the director, that we will create a precedent. Now, once we create a precedent in these matters, it can be used constantly, that it was done in that situation on that particular date, therefore we have a precedent to support this particular argument that they have. However, let me make the point here that for me, I am supposed to, under the planning authority, to put ahead as the planning authority person. And the only reason for me to put this in perspective for myself as I make the judgment, that I can't find anything here that says to me that I would take into consideration the housing shortage, because this is a planning matter. And because this is not a criteria or an acceptable solution for me to consider to make the decision or my judgment, I disqualify the housing shortage argument. Secondly, the other argument with regards to car parking that was mentioned, that's hypothetical in my view. No arguments have been presented that convinces me otherwise. Thirdly, there is a lack of any traffic assessments. There is no evidence. I would have loved to have the evidence presented before me. So for me to make the decision, it has to be based on evidence and not on other factors and other reasons. Hence, I look at clause 661, A1, the facts here that there are only 2 car parks does not meet that particular requirements of E661A1. I then am entitled to now look at the performance criteria, 661P1. Again, when I look at those 3, A, B, and C, it does not meet that as well. It does not satisfy that. Hence, as a planning authority, I am in this particular application will support the recommendation made by staff, and I would foreshadow that we recommend the support to the recommendation made by staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor then Councillor Lowe. Sorry.
Chair to the Director, if this is approved tonight, this is a hypothetical question, and if there had been a representation made against this and this ended up in the tribunal, TASCAT, would they have just been a clear-cut case of them saying, sorry, there's no chance of this standing, by just directly applying the planning scheme, or would they have had the discretion to allow it?
Through you, Chair, they would certainly have the discretion to allow it.
So they'd be re-examining it, not looking at what the criteria is and giving a black and white response on that.
That's correct. They will go through a formal hearing process and deliberate on the matter afresh. Yeah.
Could they, if it is approved or not, can a precedent be set at TASCAT as well, where someone going into a tribunal hearing can quote this exact decision if it is approved, a precedent, and therefore give more weight to a similar application which might be absolutely so bad, but unwittingly we are creating this very bad precedent?
I just want to correct the record. I indicated that this wouldn't necessarily set a precedent in planning, because each application needs to be considered on its merits, and so it won't necessarily set a precedent. In relation to your question around a decision at the tribunal, again, tribunal decisions don't necessarily set precedents, but they do provide additional clarity around interpretation of provisions. So it does provide us with some direction.
Yeah, so in summary, yeah, thank you. I agree with what's been said, that no real genuine attempt, I don't believe, has been made with any traffic assessment. The double standard situation really does worry me, and there is an option here for the applicant to create another possibility to resolve the situation if they want to do that. So I won't be supporting just to be approved tonight. I'll support the planning officer's recommendation.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Lohberger. No, oh, you didn't. I thought you had, Joe.
No, sorry.
Councillor Lohberger and then
Right.
Zuko.
Look, coming along tonight, I was of a mind to support the councillor's recommendation, council officer's recommendation. Alderman Zuko's argument, though, was very convincing. So I've had a bit of a look at it and had to think about what everyone else has said. Look, ultimately for me, I don't believe the housing crisis comes into this, because regardless of whether there's one house or 3 units or 2 units, there are still 5 bedrooms. This is not about adding more bedrooms to the supply. This is just about how we use the existing bedrooms in this property. So I'd make that point, and I also would support the council officer's finding about the difficulty of on-street parking in this area. They've been very clear about it. There's not a lot of on-street parking available, particularly at the site. So look, I will be voting to support the council officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Zuko.
Question through you to the Director in regards to the tribunal. Even if it has been stated there's no objections, if the council refuses, the proponent's still got a right to take it to the tribunal, correct? And whether there was an objector or no objector, and it goes to tribunal, the tribunal would, in first step, endeavour to mediate a solution, which could mean there could be some amendments or changes to the application on both sides, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I see Councillor Dudd. I just note Councillor Bloomfield has. Have you signalled for attention?
No, I just have a question. That's
Yeah.
a follow-up question.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sure.
Through mediation, if it goes through mediation, there is always a better outcome. Would that be correct?
Well, there's certainly scope for a better outcome, and there's greater scope to amend the application through a mediation process, the appeal process.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Bloomfield.
I have one question. How common is it for a retrospective application like this to come through?
Very common.
Not uncommon. Not uncommon.
They happen.
They do happen. Yep.
Regular thing.
If there's no other comment, I'll just quickly. I'll support the motion moved by the Lord Mayor. I think it is important, and look, it's not. Looking at representations isn't necessarily a proper planning consideration, but I think when we're looking at, especially given that it's a retrospective application, so we're looking at something that's already on the ground. The amount of times we've had applications in the past where somebody's even just adding a bedroom to an existing house, not doubling the dwellings or anything like that, and you have neighbours all up and down the street saying, you need to vote against this because the street's already tight enough as it is, and you residents are usually very quick to defend their access on the street, and given just looking at the street. I was surprised that it had no representations, but I think the fact that it hasn't indicates something to me as far as the impact that it is having. If it's been operating as it is for a fair amount of time, if it was causing issues, I think we would have been informed about that by the people in the street. I do also mostly agree with what the Lord Mayor said about. I don't completely agree with the idea of decoupling parking from planning, but I do think that each case needs to be looked at individually. There are times when you look at a good development that's being held to a parking standard that isn't necessarily relevant or applicable to the surrounding area, but then other times it really is. And if you do have a deficiency in parking, then it will impact that surrounding area. So I think it's very much a case of us exercising our discretion, But in this particular case, and I am somewhat informed by the fact that there hasn't, one of those rare instances where we haven't had issues raised by the local area, the local neighbours. I actually came into this umming and ahhing quite a bit about how, look, is this going to cut the mustard? But given that there's been no real concern by neighbours into what is already currently existing, I see that as a signal for the impact that it's having. It clearly isn't that much to raise concern. Now, did you have your hand up, Deputy?
Yeah, I don't really want to speak after you, Chair, but I think it raises a couple of issues in relation to this. Firstly, we haven't heard the reason for approval, presumably one. So can we hear that? And is it possible to have advice in relation to any sort of parking or investigation of parking, other parking spots on the property?
In terms of the reasons for approval, I think that that's a matter for the committee to outline. I do understand that Councillor Elliott did sort of explain some of her reasonings, and I think that that they relate to the discretion. So I think that they would be adequate to fulfil that reasoning. And sorry, the second question was.
Is it possible to have advice in relation to creating a subsequent parking spot?
Yeah, yes, by all means, you could put include an advice clause that consideration be given to providing additional car parking space.
And appropriate landscaping or something? Can we do that?
Appropriate landscaping. That would, of course, be subject to a further application, but that could be included as an advice clause. Yeah.
If the Lord Mayor would be happy with that as part of the motion.
Very good. If there's no other comments, I'll move the motion for approval by the Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And say no. No. Show of hands. All those in favour, raise your hand. All those against, raise your hand.
Self, Councillor Loberger, Councillor Kelly and Councillor Dutton.
We don't pass that on anymore. Very good. So we now move to the next item, item 5.1.2, 48 Liverpool Street. We have the representation from the applicant, Fraser Reid and Mark Leese. Apologies if I've butchered your pronunciation.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, Fraser Reid and Mark Lees. So, Fraser Reid, I'm a consultant planner assisting the department, and Mark is a project manager for the Department of Health. So, this proposal is to extend the occupation of the J block building on the forecourt of the hospital. You might recall the history that it was put in place during the K block construction as part of the decant, and ultimately extensive sort of health planning for the site has confirmed that we need to continue to have it there while stage 2 of the redevelopment continues. Mark can talk to any questions you may have about that, but ultimately is recommended for approval. We're happy with the conditions as proposed, which are really restating the previous conditions. And ultimately, it's a very constrained site and it's difficult. And this J block is, one of the more modern parts that's available to decant into. So it's an important part of the redevelopment going forward. So we're really happy to answer any questions you may have about it.
Deputy? And then Councillor Sultan.
Thanks, through you, Chair. Thank you for coming along. I did have a couple of questions in relation to the considerable amount of time that you're asking for. I mean, you're expecting that will be an area where patients will be transferred to, like, in temporary arrangements for that length of time.
Mark, you might be best to answer.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. At the moment, with our redevelopment phase 2, there is a number of key stages to that. So the current A block, which has, I think, 8 clinical floors on it. As we're doing the work on that site at the moment, we have to decant them obviously out of there to somewhere to then allow us to do. And we're doing sort of chunks at a time is what's proposed at the moment. And on the current time frames, I think we'd be looking at around 6 years at this stage. So that's the first stage of dealing with the current redevelopment phase 2, which we have $200 million worth of funds from the state to complete that work. But ultimately, if you look at our master plan, then we have ongoing works that we need to do even post the current planning. So this really sets in place the pieces of the puzzle that allow us then to do the other 2 larger pieces of work to the site and staying on the site.
So when J Block was put in place initially, was there not a problem with mould in relation to those demountables?
My understanding is that was at that time, and that was addressed before occupation and has been addressed going forward.
And the life of the building, I mean, they're temporary buildings, they're getting a lot of life squeezed out of them. How long are they
I believe that would be the extent of the life of those temporary buildings. We are currently refurbishing them to accommodate the particular types of wards that will need to go into there.
Thank you.
Councillor Basalt.
I've got a few questions. So prior to the 2016 application and the subsequent 2018 request for approval to 2026, you or the applicant sought and received Tasmanian Heritage Council approval.
Yes.
I may have missed it, but I cannot see that approval in the current application.
The process under the Act has actually changed over that time, and now it's integrated into the planning application. The Heritage Council provide us with that decision as part of that, and it has been referred to Heritage Council, and that I understand that they are recommending approval on the same basis.
I'll get some more advice on that. So what other options should we refuse to extend from the original 4-year lease or 4-year temporary approval? Should we refuse that being extended to 20 years, which is what's being asked of us? What would be the consequences and what would be alternate options? And has the department done any contingency planning, or is there a degree of it'll be fine and straight through council?
Good questions. From the perspective of the planning that we're doing at the moment, I don't think there'd been the level of detail at that point. It was put in place to address the K block decanting that was required. At that time, they hadn't secured funding for the redevelopment phase 2. Again, it was a block of work that needed to be done thereafter. So in now doing the detailed planning of that, it's identified that we would need that for a longer period of time to be able to effectually do the transfers that need to be done.
5 times the existing original permit.
So we're contemplating there that obviously in doing the redevelopment phase 2, that's been a necessary step to allow us to move that around, and that would clearly be needed to do the next phase of work as well, because we don't want less bed numbers. We want to at least maintain the same bed numbers or be able to increase with the further development we're doing. So the $22 million that's been spent on that facility in the first instance
And at the moment, there's works, I would imagine, to around the $10 million mark being done in there at the moment to give it an extended life into that 10 years, if not the whole 10 years. So that
at 20 years, the work being conducted is fit for purpose for the next 15 years or so.
Yes, that should be, well, 10 years would be about the limit of that clinical space. There's obviously...
Because the application is asking for 2036,
yes,
which is obviously close to 15, so is it 10 years or is it 15?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
That's okay. Is there contingency planning if we refuse the application?
There's not at this stage to be able to continue the redevelopment phase 2 works.
Yep. Sorry, my understanding was that this is to facilitate, this application is to facilitate stage 3. So
stage 2.
Stage 2 is already approved up to 2026, and I thought this was stage to allow for decant to stage 3.
Well, phase 3, yeah, also considers using the repat area, so that would be a key part of that, yes.
Let's check my list. I think that's all from me for now.
Councillor Lohberger and then the Lord Mayor, sorry.
All right, thanks for coming in, guys. So, from what I can see, you're looking, I guess I should ask you the question, are you expecting the redevelopment of the Royal to last until 2035? Is that what we're hearing?
That's, I think the site itself will have to continue to be developed over time. The master planning addresses, I believe, a 25-year time span. Yeah. So continue, having committed to that site, there is continual development required into the future. Yes. Yeah.
That's it, thank you.
Can we just ask, I think some people are having trouble listening. Can you just bring the microphone a bit?
Yep, certainly.
Councillor Lohberger, would you mind? I think you probably need to speak
yes,
into the microphone.
It's a bit of an awkward spot here. I just asked whether the gentleman expected that the redevelopment of the Royal would be lasting until 2035, which is suggested by the application, and that was a yes.
Okay. I've got the Lord Mayor next.
Sorry, I'll try and talk into there and talk to you. So yeah, it is a bit of a conundrum. So you've only got the money for phase 2, the $200 million, and phase 3, there's no money, there's no budget allocation for it yet, is there?
Oh, that's my understanding.
Right. So I mean, it just worries me in a way that there could just be a reliance on this kind of demountable building, and we could sort of extend the life, and everyone says, oh well, she'll be right, that'll do, and we won't allocate the funding to actually do the development in a more timely manner. And this has been going for quite a long time. And I'm also wondering, why would phase 2 take 6 years to build?
It's the challenges of working in an operating hospital. There's certain standards you've got to these days require. COVID certainly hasn't helped us in terms of being able to build within that site, and the infection prevention controls that have now been put in place and continue to be put in place. So
the phase 2 doesn't involve, I thought everyone would move into this building and then you demolish and off you go with phase 2. Is that what phase 2 involves? Is it a brand new building?
No, phase 2 is fixing A block,
right,
which has been there for 50 years and leaking all
yeah.
through. We've just actually refurbished one floor, and it's continuing to leak in there because we haven't addressed some of the broader issues with that building. So to be able to do what they call the stacking process of taking people out of there, we need J block to put them into. I don't think that was fully contemplated back at the start, especially when there's the demand for greater bed numbers and not reducing services. So I think that expansion or commitment to expansion whilst still trying to sort out the site has been quite a challenge.
Yeah.
The emergency department project's my main part that I'm working on, and it takes a lot longer to do than you would hope.
Yeah, so I mean, would it be reasonable for the council to approve the extension to the end of phase 2 and then say, well, let's see where we are after that? Because there is that concern of just sort of saying, well, you know, none of us will probably be around the table in 2035, and do we just sort of send a message that this J block will be
I suppose coming back to
acceptable as a almost like a permanent part of our hospital?
Well, I think part of it is the actual, like, if cardiology is one of the departments going into J block, and that's through, you know, the all assessment of the options, and it sort of needs to go there.
Yeah.
The actual change to that fit out is an expensive fit out. So for the community just to have it for 5 years or something doesn't make sense. But if it's the 10-year duration, it starts to make sense. It's just about getting the best value for the community at the end of the day.
And if I could add to that, just back to that point of planning and giving us the opportunity of not being knee-jerk, to actually go, right, when we do phase 3, here we have this building to allow us to do that decanting as the preferred option of going ahead.
Hey, we've got Councillor Kelly and then Councillor Basalt again.
Through you, Chair, to the Director. I was under the opinion, Director, that temporary structures were not permitted. I'd actually applied for a temporary structure myself on my property.
Councillor Kelly, we might leave the questions for the Director until after the applicants have...
Oh, sure. Okay.
Do you have any more questions for the applicants?
No.
Councillor Basalt.
So just a clarifying point, because I'm just a little bit confused myself. I thought that we had given you approval until 2026, which covered stage 2. Is that correct or not correct?
There was, I think it's 2025 or 2026 was the time frame. I don't think it was specific to stage 2. I don't think it was just required for ongoing work. I'm happy to check. Well, Mark, you might be able to confirm, but yeah.
That's okay, because the original one was contingent on completion that had a date or K-block completion, and that it would be removed within 6 months of.
Yes.
So I'm happy to be stand corrected, but I think that you have approval for stage 2, and what you're asking for is approval for stage 3 decanting. Is that correct?
My recollection was that the stage, well, the original approval was for K-block, and then at the end of that, obviously K-block was taking a bit longer, but also that after K-block was actually populated, you'd have all these other facilities that actually needed to be reviewed again before they could be used. So that was really the first 5 years, and now what we're talking about is actually the stage 2 stuff, which is what Mark explained,
So
A-block and those things.
So are you saying, because you're asking for 2035, 2036, are you suggesting that stage 2 will not be complete until 2036?
No.
No. So it is an application to cover stage 3, decanting for stage 3.
Yes, the majority of the time will be for that. With the way stage 2 is not getting or not being able to be done in the way which we'd hoped, then part of it will obviously
may push into that period, sure,
yes.
But the majority of the period is to cover stage 3, not stage 2. You don't have funding secured for stage 3 at this point, or you do?
I don't believe so.
So there's no funding, so we're approving a temporary building to cover decanting for a project that has no funding. Is my summation of what I'm hearing?
Not quite, no. So
Point of order,
if
Chair.
it's 6...
This is becoming a debate rather than questions. This is about asking direct questions to get direct answers. It's now become a debate. It's not relevant to the point.
I know it's a technical issue here. We'll just keep the questions through the chair and keep rather than get conversation between applicants and councillors if possible. Like the question, yeah. I understand you've got a lot of questions. Let's just try and keep it.
No. I think that's it. Yeah. Trying to clarify
Good. Were there any? We're all good. Are there any other questions of the applicants? Okay, Councillor Dada.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just one question. My understanding is that the extension is needed for 10 years. Now, is it possible to reduce that to 5, or because of building demands, etc., that is not a realistic ask?
It's my understanding that the 5 years is not long enough, because we're saying we need it till 29, basically, based on the further 6 years. There needs some certainty around the ability to use that for the decant space for the refurbishment work. So 5 years goes very quickly, particularly when you're trying to develop a hospital.
Just a follow-up question, Chair, through you. My question is it possible to ask for 5 and then come back for another 5 if it's required or needed?
You're saying till 31.
It's sort of 36, yeah.
It's possible to do that. I suppose what the department's seeking is I suppose they're seeking to be transparent that they anticipate that they will need it.
Deputy?
And just for clarification, again, Mr. Reid, you suggested that the cost of having a temporary cardiology unit in there would be significant, so that's why you're suggesting you'd need to have it for a long period of time?
That's what I understood when I was first briefed on it, that the sort of fit out that you need to do to actually decant some of these spaces in there, it's not like we're moving office space in and out. Obviously it's quite specialist, so the fit out is expensive, and just to have it for a very short time frame doesn't make a lot of sense.
And one final question, it's not a planning question, but it's a funding question. Would you be likely to have something funded so many years in advance in relation to that stage 3?
I don't know in that regard, but not usually.
Any other questions? If not...
Yeah, I move the recommendation. Sorry.
Thanks a lot. Take your seats.
Thank you.
We'll get it. So, I hear you, Councillor Dada, but I know Councillor Kelly just had a question that he was going to ask before, so I might give him the opportunity to ask that question first.
Temporary approvals, Director, are they very common? Because I've applied before for temporary and have been refused on the grounds that, look, the trouble with temporary approvals is that they turn into exactly what's happened here. They morph into another extension, and all of a sudden you've got these pop-up lean-to arrangements that are quite eyesore and everything else on the landscape. So I was just curious, was this as an exception at the time?
It's not common, but they can occur.
Okay. Look, just to briefly, I don't know how no one could not support this. I mean, you sort of most leave town with ambulance ramping and the health crisis and all that. It does put us in a bit of an awkward situation to not do anything but support the recommendation. But to me, it just seems another case as the previous case we heard tonight, application. It is policy on the run. And I just think generally that it's lowering the whole standard of this city and what we should actually strive for. And this example, because of what would appear to me lack of planning on the state government's part, we're going to wear here. It's not end of world stuff, but it's just a comment I thought I'd make. Thank you.
I'll go Councillor Dada and then Councillor Psal.
I move the recommendation as it on the book. Thanks.
I had a clarification point that's just that with the director that has just skipped my mind. So if anyone else wants to take the call while I'm trying to recall it.
So when we approved J Block to start with, did you identify any issues around sort of pedestrian access, traffic management, any of those? And on that base, but we thought it was only going to be up for, how long did we think it was going to be up for? 4 years? And now it's a 30-year building or something?
20 years in total.
A 20-year building, right. But yeah, I mean, do you recall, I can't remember myself, but
Yeah, look, we did look at circulation around the building and along the street, and we were reasonably satisfied that those matters were covered.
And that's turned out to be the case, the loss of that kind of front apron where people can gather and stuff. Is that still a problem?
Well, look, in terms of the heritage setting of the building, that was certainly considered and is considered in this application. However, there's not a loss of heritage fabric per se. They've required to retain some of those physical elements, and this is a temporary installation,
yeah.
but it's certainly extending to a outer limit in our opinion, I think.
I was sort of more thinking of the ability for people to move through the site, and there used to be a feel of a bit more space where people could be out the front or meet, like it's kind of...
Yeah. Look, I don't think that was necessarily a concern for the officers at the time.
Yeah, I mean, as Councillor Kelly said, it's difficult for us to not, approve it. And I'm sure it's fine, but it was always meant to be a 4-year building, and it's a 20-year building, so that does. But there's nothing here in the application that I can see there's a major problem with that. So I guess, yeah, happy to approve it.
Oh, we could all just vote now.
Well, I share Councillor Kelly's concerns. It's a pretty horrendous addition to the front of a heritage building, and taking the gargoyles, for want of a better term, off the front of what was probably a 1920s building is such a shame. But it is such a difficult site, having worked there previously. And knowing how difficult it is to work on a building site for so many years, I feel for the applicant. So I will be supporting this. I don't think we have any choice. But through you to the director, can we condition this to, just in relation to any further extension or any sort of change in plans? Because it would be a terrible thing that this were not removed at some stage. We got to that point.
Look, you can't add a condition that this won't be extended at any further point in time. What you could say is provide advice to say that. Yeah, well, you could say that there are concerns that this.
That this would be.
Consideration needs to be given that to avoid any further extension as much as possible.
And the condition is so it's remediation as part of the conditions.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
It's got to be removed within 6 months after the expiry of the time frame of 2035.
Did we get that as part of once the cable lock had been built?
We did have that condition, but of course there was the extension requested, and
so that advice. So we could have another advice clause just in relation to remediation, or is it covered? You feel?
No, the remediation is covered within the conditions.
Yep.
That's fine. The suggested condition would be around, strongly encourage the applicant to. Yes. No, I think the clarification question was in relation to the Heritage Council, and that approval, and that's on page 87 of the agenda.
So I'll move that as an advice clause. as part of as an amendment, or if...
Councillor Dutta, happy to just include that? Yeah.
You're happy with that? Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Harvey?
Yes, Chair. Look, I'm happy to support this. I don't think we have an option. The only issue I do have is, like, this is the longest hospital build, I think, in Australian history. And if we're not too careful, we'll end up having J Block declared heritage at some point in time. as a fine example of a temporary building that lasted forever.
That's my old favourite saying, Councillor Harvey, about nothing is permanent as a temporary government measure. It turns out the same thing applies to buildings as well. Councillor Basalt.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, that was the point I was seeking clarity on. Is there also a possibility of putting in a condition of the approval that funding is secured for the works?
No, it's not necessarily a plan. Sorry, Chair. Not relevant planning condition.
Okay.
Can we put in advice that the applicant is strongly encouraged to seek funding for the stage 3 proposal?
Well, you could, but yeah, I take the point that the Deputy Lord Mayor has stated that, you know, that's 6 years out or 5 years out. I'm not sure that there is secured funding for those sorts of projects that far out. So,
look, I'll say my piece now. I'm disappointed in the way that the process has gone for this particular large development that has enormous resources behind it. We've had a approval of, or the start of the work done, planning work done in 2012, and we knew that this project would take this length of time. We knew that all along. For everything, with everything that we know about the hospital redevelopment, it was always going to be a 25-year redevelopment. And so why we were given an application for a temporary building for 4 years that was never going to be that, I fail to see. And I have questions about whether it would have been approved in the first instance had they been asking for 20, given the heritage constraints and some of the amenity concerns, particularly for patients, but also for light into the emergency department, which has a number of skylights that provide some light into what is an underground ward that have been completely covered and are now shaded. I agree that we probably do have to approve this, but it's I'm a little bit dismayed that other more permanent solutions weren't sought in 2016, such as refurbishment of the Wellington clinics to meet this need, if it was foreseen that it would be a 20-year build. So again, you know, with the amendment and the condition, you know, I'm reluctantly will support this, but would hope that the state government can do better moving forward.
Councillor Elliott next.
Yes. I'll be supporting the application. I don't have concerns from a planning perspective, even though it is a temporary building for an extended period of time. I do have confidence in applicants that it's a genuine temporary building, even though it's for a considerable period of time with extension. I also have confidence in them that they're the experts in terms of their needs, their decanting and construction approach, and their funding and timeframes.
Any comment? No, so I'll move the item moved by Councillor Dutta with the advice clause. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. It's carried unanimously. Very good. Okay, we now move to, let me just get my...
Move 5.1.3.
Yeah, move it. Yep.
5.1.3.
Move that.
Any comment? No, I'll move that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Very good. Part 6 report, 6.1 delegated decision report.
Received and noted.
Moved by Alderman Zuko.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Through you to the Director, there's 20 applications for short stay in the delegated approval. That's very good. You've delegated it. We haven't had to deal with it. Was there any reason why none of them came to Council?
Well, look,
they weren't called in. Is that what
they're either not called in or they were dealt with under my emergency delegation.
Thought I'd ask the question.
Any other
question?
Councillor Dada.
Thank you. I noted the same, that the visitor accommodation, was it 20 or less than 20? Okay, thank you. Now, the question that I have is how many of the 20 were a complete house or a unit?
I couldn't give you that.
All right.
Yeah.
Could we take that on notice?
There was one, if I can, there was one of the 20 was split in two. That I can recall.
Happy to come back with you with that advice, Chair.
Thank you.
Any other comment? I'll move that. All those in favour say aye. Very good. 6.2, advertising report.
Thank you, Chair. The item 4 on the list is a council project which is upgrading the pipeline track. That item will come to the committee at the next meeting. I'll also mention that the council has received an application for 83 Melville Street, which is a UTAS proposal. That's not on this list, but I wanted to flag that one early as there may be some interest in that application. It's for some changes to the development to allow for greater access to the property.
Which one?
Forestry.
Any comment or questions? Deputy.
Oh, no.
Oh.
I think Alderman Zuko's moved it, hasn't he?
Oh, yes, very good.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, the numbers are great.
Well done.
When
Good
you
suggestion.
say something, we're all like, which one's that? Which page is that on? No, look, thank you.
simple.
Such a simple change, yeah. It's little things. I'll move that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.
Move to government closed.
Just a question. Are we having questions without notice, Chair?
No, through you, Chair. No, I understand that questions without notice are dealt with within the workshops. I think that was part of our policy position approved.
I actually flagged that at the council meeting. No one took it up. But questions without notice were not going to happen anymore.
Councillor Dada.
I also spoke to the director about that because I, in fact, must have been sleeping at the time, and I apologise if I didn't pick it up. I think it's an important aspect to have in the planning anyway, and I'm sure we can go back to it. And
I might just ask the question myself. Should we want to return to having questions on notice? Could we resolve that by motion of this committee? Would that have to go to council?
As council.
I believe it would have to go to council.
I have a question on that, if you wouldn't. When questions on notice, I was going to ask this question of one of our officers.
Notice.
Yes, questions without notice.
Yeah.
Was first introduced. I cannot recall whether or not we actually developed a policy or we just agreed in council. When can I just put you on put that point forward so that can be checked, because if the council actually made it a policy, we haven't rescinded the policy, but if it was just a council decision to do so, we did rescind that in the last council meeting. So we need to check whether or not it was a policy or just a decision.
So, and also questions both with and without notice are in the Local Government Act. So if this is a committee under the Local Government Act, then I don't think we can not have it. You'll have to just accept questions without notice from elected, because I think it's our right under the Local Government Act.
Yeah,
there may not be an agenda item for it, but it's sort of, you can't sort of contract out of that, I don't think.
No, I think the purpose was, clearly if it's a question related to the application before us, I should provide a response. If there's a question around another matter, well, I think what is proposed by the policy is it's probably more appropriately done in the workshop. It can be taken on notice and documented response provided.
So, but if it's around any of these items here,
right.
then that's all fine.
That's a legitimate question because.
But the Lord Mayor's right. I want to add to it. The Lord Mayor is absolutely correct. Under the Act, we have a right to ask questions with or without notice in council. We introduced that into committee I think what we need to check is whether or not we put it into a policy or it was simply a council resolution. Now, I could ask you to take that on notice because I think it's very, very important to take on notice. And I did flag this at the last council meeting, but no one heard what I said.
Clarify that.
Yeah, I think the point is really valid. If it's an act, then no policy can supersede the act. The act supersedes the policy, and so therefore, that's an important point to note. I think.
I agree with everything that's been said. I just note that it seems that this is something that we need to hash out in full council in the next council meeting rather than here. So, but I think it's something that we need to get to the bottom of and rectify if we need to rectify, because I think it is, as the Lord Mayor said, it's not just an important part of our duties to ask questions, it's also our right under the Act. But I'll just leave that there, just given that we can't do anything about it today.
But if there's any questions related to matters here, that's all right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, by all means. Yeah.
Because around the advertising report and those sort of things.
Through you, Chair, it's not, this is questions without notice. As I said, questions related to items you ask me all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not proposed to change.
But Chair, what for me, that is quite okay. If we have an item in there, we ask the question, that's quite okay. But let me give an example. I was thinking of asking a question as to how much is it costing us, or will cost us with regards to the tribunal and mediation with the cable car. That's an information, but because it's not the agenda, I can't ask that question. And you can't take that away because it's a planning thing.
Bring in new information.
It looks like it's quite clear in Division 4, Section 29, questions without notice, so that it can be a committee meeting, so sounds like it's a sensible thing to have.
Yeah, we'll just reintroduce it.
I think we reintroduce it, but...
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you can have your questions here and in the workshops and potentially even at council meetings and precinct committee.
That's right.
Not precinct.
Or
portfolio
any other, elected member questions to the general manager, to the CEO at any time.
I move that we go into closed.
Motion go into closed. All those in favour say aye. Say no. Unanimously. We'll just wait for